Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. We're looking on the side of your screen at a live shot of the Rotunda. It was just a service for the president, the late President George.H.W. Bush, who lies in state. And it will be a week of remembering our 41st president. And we have an hour dedicated in large part to the president, and then also the latest developments on Capitol Hill. We'll be joined by congresspeople, former U.S. attorneys, and the rest. But I want to spend the beginning of this program remembering a president who was, in all intents and purposes, a public servant for almost his entire life. A few minutes ago, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said a few words.
The patriot who lies before us was blessed with many gifts, but there was no doubt which he prized most of all. A great love story began at that Christmas dance when George Bush met Barbara Pierce, and the grace and virtue they taught their children have enriched this nation through a family of leaders.
Now people will have a chance to pay their respects to the former commander-in-chief. Former President George.H.W. Bush's final journey to Washington. The flight, Special Air Mission 41, touched down at Joint Base Andrews to a military salute. The flag-draped casket followed by the Bush family, including son, former President George W. Bush. Earlier in Houston, the presidential plane, commissioned during Bush 41's presidency and designated Air Force One when the sitting president is aboard, served as the backdrop of a solemn military honors ceremony. The former president will lie in state inside the Capitol Rotunda, giving Americans a chance to say goodbye as the nation remembers a life of service.
Could not have had a better influence. He taught me is, family always comes first, and you do what you can to help the world.
Despite a long-running feud with the Bush family, President Trump taking part in the tributes this week, tweeting, "Looking forward to being with the Bush family to pay my respects to President George H.W. Bush." Bush 41's final words were to Bush 43, "I love you too." The Bush Foundation releasing excerpts from the president's diary, including messages to his family.
If you need me, I'm here. Devotedly, Dad.
And in President Bush's final moments, loved ones say the 94-year-old was ready.
He kept his sense of humor right till the very end, but his passing was very gentle and very peaceful.
Now, I want to take a look at an incredible life of the late president and a life of public service.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
George Herbert Walker Bush was sworn into a world that he called rich with promise.
For a new breeze is blowing, and a world refreshed by freedom seems reborn.
The 41st president and his presidency were shaped by the upheavals of the 20th century. On his 18th birthday, he enlisted to fight in World War II, becoming the youngest pilot in the U.S. Navy. By 1948, the future president had married Barbara Pierce and moved his family from New England to Texas, where he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. He soon rose to become ambassador to the UN and then China, director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and under Ronald Reagan, vice president. After 2 terms in the Reagan administration, Bush ran for president himself, defeating Michael Dukakis. Bush made a promise that he would later break.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
But progress on his watch was felt around the world. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of communism in Eastern Europe. Perhaps most notably, the liberation of Kuwait after the Iraqi invasion.
A line has been drawn in the sand.
Despite his mass popularity after the Gulf War, a faltering economy and a growing budget deficit eventually weakened his presidency. And in 1992, Bush was defeated by Bill Clinton. With the election of George W. Bush in 2000, the senior Bush joined John Adams as both president and presidential father. He devoted his retirement to helping others, raising money with President Clinton for Asian tsunami and Hurricane Katrina victims.
He easily could have chosen a life of comfort and privilege. And instead, time and again, when offered a chance to serve, he seized it.
In the end, Bush, like his son, insisted he would let history measure his legacy. And joining me now is Giancarlo Peressutti, a former aide to President George H.W. Bush. And you lost both a former employer, a friend, and you've said long before this passing he was your hero.
Yeah, for sure. You know, Richard, when during my time working for President Bush, and I worked for him in his post-presidential capacity, and even to this day, people would say to me how fortunate I was to get to work for a former president. And they got it half right. I was fortunate to work for a former president, but where I was more fortunate was to get to work for among, if not the best person that I've ever met in my life. Someone who was humble, someone who saw the joy in life, saw the good in other people, did the right thing 10 out of 10 times, loved to laugh, loved to make other people feel good about themselves and lift up all those that were around him. And that's the kind of person he was. His professional life, his life of public service will be well documented for weeks, months, years, and hopefully centuries to come. But what I would like to share most is just what a wonderful human being he was. And he taught me everything about what's important in life and how to be a man, frankly.
He will be the last president who served in World War II in the quote-unquote greatest generation. And I know he talked to you in personal moments about how that was obviously a life-saving moment. We talked about the youngest airman in World War II, decorated, Distinguished Cross, but he lost two airmates that day. And he talked openly that it shaped his life. He took pride in his service to country, but the sacrifice of others even shaped how he prosecuted the war with Desert Storm and how he thought about our role in the world.
Well, that's exactly right. And you know, I think any president would say that the most solemn duty that they need to carry out is committing someone else's son or daughter into harm's way. As a veteran, certainly you have an appreciation for that. As a squadron leader who actually lost two people in the course of battle, boy, that really brings that point home truer than it ever possibly could. And so George Bush knew the consequences of battle. He knew the consequences of war. He saw them firsthand and lost two friends and as you said, former squad mates. And it absolutely shaped both his outlook on foreign policy, but also his role as commander-in-chief, undoubtedly.
Listen, we're surrounded, and I've been doing this for more than 25 years. There are politicians who are transactional. They are ones that are even good at what they do, but a press secretary will come and go and they'll never be heard from again. A lowly staffer, they'll never know the name. It has been remarkable to me that no matter what chapter of people who knew the late president, they stayed with him for their life. I mean, I saw Colin Powell and James Baker reduced to tears this weekend talking about not just the friend that they lost and their former boss, but also a man that they hoped their sons would be like. Why did he connect so much on a personal level? Because in many ways, he wasn't a self-promoter, and that hurt him politically. He didn't spike the football after the end of the Cold War. He didn't believe in that. He used an analogy once, you should be like the coach who doesn't go on the field. Let your players celebrate. Let your staffers have their moment or whatever. Why did so many people for a lifetime feel so devoted to him?
So I'd say for two reasons. As I mentioned before, and as you alluded to, he generally loved and cared about people, all people. You know, you'd go up to the residence in Kennebunkport, and the cast of characters that would be assembled there, friends from all sorts of walks of life, from athletes to country music stars to local lobstermen to whomever. George Bush was a collector of people, and I mean that in the best possible sense. He genuinely loved people. He loved getting to know people, and as I said, lifted everyone up around him. So that's the first reason. He and Mrs. Bush treated their staff impeccably.
If I could interrupt, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
A butler at the White House when his mother was in failing health, he was there and he doted on, and he said, "You're going to be fine." I'm sorry, it was his wife. "You're here with family," and he left a loved one with a butler, and you can always tell a lot from the White House staff. They said they were more connected to that Bush family, and they would, if their kids ever didn't make it better, whatever took privilege for granted, they'd hear it. You owe meeting your wife to the president.
I do indeed. My wife's a native of Kennebunk, Maine, and was a reporter at the CBS affiliate in Portland at the time. and was asked to cover a charity event, a big charity event in that neck of the woods, and it was one that President Bush was headlining, and that's where she and I met. And to this day, Kennebunk and Kennebunkport are special places for us and for our girls, and will be for the foreseeable future for certain. But the last thing that I would say is loyalty is a two-way street, and I think people in Washington often forget that. Every principal expects loyalty from his or her staff, but in order to earn that loyalty, you have to return it, and the Bushes certainly do that in spades.
He was once asked the best part of being president, and he said, the honor of it. Far better man than me after some of the ugliness in the 2016 campaign and what was said by the current occupant of his family. And Barbara Bush famously said, I don't want him there for mine. But George Herbert Walker Bush said he wanted the current president to go. And for the last few days since the passing, President Trump has been, in fact, we understand he will go by and pay respects tonight. He sent Air Force One to collect the body. But why do you think he did that? I know most people wouldn't have done that, given how personal and how ugly it got, and how the current occupant does not honor the presidency the same way that your old boss did.
One of the beautiful things about him as a person was his incredible short memory when it came to adversaries. George Bush did not hold a grudge. George Bush, if something controversial happened, if you did something to him he didn't like, it happened, he got over it, and he moved on. He had an incredibly long memory when it came to people that he liked and loved, and did anything and everything he could, as I said, to make them feel good about themselves. But it wasn't in his nature to be angry or to be mean or to hold a grudge. And so, for him, bygones are bygones. And in politics, both races that he ran in 1988 and 1992 had their share of ugly moments. And to be fair, ugly moments that were brought about on his side, in several famous instances. But that's the game. And when the game's over and you get about the business of governing or leading life or moving on, George Bush moved on and was never one to dwell on a slight or a controversial moment.
I was struck by a story, and you were a first-hand witness to it. Saturday Night Live has a lot of fun with presidents, but Dana Carvey launched a career in part. In fact, he did a stand-up of Bush that many people can still do the lines today. I never knew the story that after the '92 election, obviously the re-election bid doesn't go the way President Bush had wanted. He sees the staff down, and he asked Carvey to do an impromptu performance for the staff. Now, a lot of people have said, this guy hurt my chances. In fact, we have a soundbite.
1,000 points of light still operating, coming in from all those areas. Not gonna do it. Not gonna do it.
Dana, George Bush here. I'm watching you do your impression of me, and I gotta say, it's nothing like me. Bears no resemblance. It's bad. It's bad.
He could have some fun with himself.
Completely. And to Dana Carvey's credit, I mean, the imitations he made weren't mean. They were goofy. Everyone got a laugh about it. But the real nugget in that anecdote, Richard, is the fact that after he lost the election, what did George Bush do? He thought about his staff. He thought about letting them down. He felt he had a responsibility to lift their spirits. And so he called on someone that poked fun of him on a weekly basis to say, hey, will you come into the White House? And I'll tell you a little side story that's not well known. The president asked, so it's the White House military that does all the AV in the White House, and asked the announcer, the so-called voice of God, to announce, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, and have Dana Carvey walk out. And initially they wouldn't do it because they said, Mr. President, sir, we can't do that if it's not you that's walking out. And he had to convince the military to say, no, I'm ordering you to say that so Dana Carvey can walk out and surprise everyone, because the staff had no idea that Dana Carvey was coming.
For all night, but really quickly, I know the president hated the word legacy. He said, let the historians do it. What do you think his will be?
I hope that it's one of honor and decency, and that it is all of the personal attributes that you and I talked about. I think of your children and my children growing up in a world where politics, unfortunately now, has such an ugly patina to it. And I think that hope that George Bush's legacy will see there was a time, there was a man in the not so distant past that was able to transcend that and bring his humanity and his goodness to public life and public service. Not to say that he always did the right thing. By his own admission, he made plenty of mistakes, but he always did it from a good place. And that legacy of honor and nobility and the honor of serving your country, if that can be George Bush's legacy, then it will be an honorable one, and it will be one that will serve America well.
Well said. I know you're going to be going down to D.C. to honor your late boss. Thank you, my friend, for your time.
Thank you.
All right, when we come back, President Trump's ties to Russia did not start when he decided to run for president. They've been going on for decades. After the break, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who's been digging into those ties for just about the entire time. We'll have that conversation straight ahead.